Good evening, and welcome to another edition of Making the Case. A special welcome also to those of you joining us on Facebook Live in Guyana and around the world. As most of you would be aware by now, the outcome of the proceedings yesterday at the Caribbean Court of Justice is that the relevant parties make written submissions on or before the 1st of July, and the court will subsequently make consequential orders on the 12th of July. As most of you are aware, the court ruled on the 18th of June that the appointment of the GCOM chairman was unconstitutional, but he remained as chairman and continued to preside over meetings in his capacity as the chairman up until today, when he finally demitted office. There was some disappointment yesterday when the CCJ did not make its consequential orders, but we were always aware and prepared for a long and hard fight. The PNC today is the same PNC of the past. Only the name has changed. The nature of the PNC remains. And so we are not at all surprised by their desperation to hold on to power at all costs. They continue to violate the Constitution. They continue to deny you and me the right to vote. And they continue to embarrass us with their incompetence and deceptive interpretation of the Constitution before the CCJ and the rest of the world. Joining me tonight to discuss yesterday's proceedings and the APNU AFC's desperate attempt to avoid facing the electorate of Guyana is Member of Parliament and Opposition Chief Whip, Madam Gail Teixeira. Ms. Teixeira, this is your first time on Making the Case. A very, very warm welcome to you. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'm no longer an MP though.
After listening to yesterday's proceedings at the CCJ, can you sum up for us what you took away from the presentations before the court?
Well, very clearly, I think that not only I think the court was disappointed, but we as Guyanese were disappointed, as you rightly said, that the fact that the government did not submit written submissions, that our lawyer, Mr. Mendez, and our side submitted written submissions not only to the court, but to the government lawyers, although they denied they'd received it. They had been sent it. And therefore their pretense of not having received it. And then furthermore, the attempt to deceive the court that in fact the president had written the leader opposition immediately after and that we had not said anything. So this impression that we hadn't responded, we had to, Mr. Mendez had debunked that as well, to say that the letter was just saying after the June 24th sitting and after the consequential orders.
Right.
So I mean, those were two things that where you have the government lawyers actually not telling the truth in front of the court. I think you call that perjury, but we'll leave that for another day. But I think the shocking presentation was by the lawyer Marcus in terms for GCOM, where I think he caught everyone off guard when he said that the earliest the list could be ready was December 25th. I think everyone wanted to fall off their chairs. And one of the things I think we need to recognize, and I think the court recognized, that the preparation of the list is only one component,
Right.
that it would take a minimum of 50 to 60 days afterwards. Clearly you saw in the judges some, if you want to call it impatience, or because the kind of questions that were asked in terms of what was the government prepared to not have elections and to postpone it and as I said, keep the country and the people in limbo. Were very clear statements by the court. So I think that as we said when I think we were disappointed that the government has basically got another 3 weeks almost. And so if the consequential orders we assume will come out on July the 12th, that 3 months will count from then. But clearly the government, from everything they've done, there's total reluctance and refusal actually to have elections in 3 months.
Right, so we're seeing a deliberate attempt at being dishonest when it comes to setting a date, the earliest date or any date for elections. And they continue to shift the goalposts. If you can recall, the Chronicle, surprisingly, the Chronicle carried the story on the 27th of December last year when the PRO for GCOM, Yolanda Ward, said that GCOM will be ready to deliver elections at any time. Then we were told,
prescribed period.
Then we were told that GCOM would be ready in November. And then yesterday, as you said, we heard Stanley Marcus, the lawyer for GCOM, say December 25th. I actually have that clip from yesterday's proceeding in which the judges were insisting that elections should have been held on the 21st of March, and the lawyer of Marcus saying the 25th. Let us go to that clip, please.
Well, this is the point, because there is
That's
a
the list of electors.
the list of electors. I'm sorry. The list, the OLE, the official list of electors, because there is a controversy raging as to what list is to be used, and Mr. Marcus will address you on that. He has not, and I have not been referred to, I should put it this way, to any provision which gives the Commission the power to delay an election because it considers that it is not ready with a list. I have not been referred to any provision. If the President, under normal circumstances, decides in his discretion to dissolve Parliament and to declare an election, then the Commission must comply. There is I have not seen any provision which gives the Commission the power to say to the President that that date is invalid, you must fix another date. Of course, I imagine that the President, in deciding the date of the election, would consult with the Commission.
What about
62.
Article 162.2? Notwithstanding anything to the contrary in this Constitution, if the Elections Commission is satisfied with the holding of an election pursuant to the provisions of paragraph 2 of Article 60 or Article 162 on the day appointed, therefore would be attended by danger or serious hardship, it may, after consultation with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, by notice published in the Gazette, postpone the holding of the election to a day specified in the notice. What about that?
Well, if it decides that the necessary preconditions for the exercise of that power exists, then it will do so irrespective of what this court says. But this court cannot fashion an order on the presumption that the Commission is satisfied that the preconditions for that power exist. And I haven't heard it yet in any event said that there is any danger or serious hardship in existence.
Yes,
But in any event, that is
that's a different
discussion. That is a different.
My apologies, that was the incorrect clip, but that was a good piece of presentation from Attorney Mendez. Now, today you wrote the President.
Mr. Harman.
Mr. Harman, sorry, Mr. Harman, and indicated that the Leader of the Opposition is ready to meet.
Yes, today I wrote on behalf of Mr. Jagdeo to Mr. Harman, who has been asked to communicate with the President, and in response to my letter, I have received an acknowledgement by Mr. Harman. The letter has been made public, but basically the Leader of the Opposition, through my letter, is indicating to the President that he is prepared to meet at any time, every day, daily if needs be, in order to address the appointment of a new chairman of GCOM in compliance with the CCJ ruling of June the 18th. And the ruling was that, first of all, the appointment of Mr. Patterson was flawed and a breach of Constitution. But the ruling itself goes on further to that and says that it encourages the Leader and the President to meet and they set out a mechanism, that is that there should be some exchange. They encourage the two gentlemen to exchange names to try to come up prior to the official submission of the Leader of the Opposition of a list which the President finds not unacceptable So by the point when the list goes to the president, he can't then reject a name. So that's the mechanism the court is proposing. And obviously the court is very, very clear on the fact that it is not accepting unilateralism. And in fact, the reason why these amendments were made going back to the Carter formula in 1991, made into law in 1995, made into a constitutional provision in the 99 period, was to allow for inclusivity and for actually, because of the elections are traumatic here and always seem to be a cause of controversy, and in many cases violence by the PNC, that the agreement was that the leading opposition submits 6 names, the president accepts 1, in order that the person may not be either one of the two sides' members or supporters, but they reside trust in that person to be fair. By the president's appointment of Patterson, he fractured completely a practice that had started in 91, went all the way up to 2015 when the elections were held. And the president came along and destroyed literally a practice, a law, the constitution, which had been in place, in which PPP presidents were PPPC, as well as even the Mr. Hoyt had agreed and accepted to. So that I think that I will hope that Mr. President will recognize and read his initial comments that he wanted to know how. If it was fraud,
I guess.
you know,
He wants the
wanted
court,
the court to
tell
advise
him.
him. Well, the court rulings, the documents are on the CCJ website, and I'm sure the president has time, or should have time, to read the summary, if not the full document, which makes very clear on what grounds that his decision was flawed and a breach of the Constitution. So the leading opposition is available, ready, at any time, and daily if needs be, to meet. And as you know, that in the court you saw Mr. Mendez in that clip. Mr. Mendez had spoken prior to that, pointing out that we were prepared that within a week the list could be finalized in the mechanism proposed by the CCJ, and the president could have 3 days. So that's 10 days in order to reach an agreement, because the court seemed to have been concerned at some point in the discussion or the representations on June the 24th that how could you have elections without a chairman of GCOM? So the assurance by our side that we were willing to cooperate, and that we felt that 10 days maximum, and we were certainly ready to present names at a very short notice to the president. So we have indicated, and I'm pleased that Mr. Harmon responded with alacrity to the letter. So we hope that things will start moving in a serious manner. But on the issue of the elections, that's a different issue. So we may get some movement on, at least where the stage where the Patterson is resigned, and now we have indicated our willingness to move in this direction. On the issue of the list, that's a different. We're now dealing with a different kettle of fish, is what your clip from Marcus was about.
We're going to come to that. Now, the thing that amazes me is that everything on the government side makes everything look so complicated, so difficult to do. I mean, it's not hard. The leader of the opposition keeps saying, I can get the list to you in 7 days, you can choose somebody, because now he knows. He's been advised by the CCJ that he has to choose from the list.
Exactly.
And we heard the Attorney General. I mean, I can say that he completely misrepresented yesterday when the court directly asked him, did the leader of the opposition and the president meet? Yeah. And he conveniently left out the part in the letter that said after June the 24th. Yeah. He made it sound like the president is willing and the leader of the opposition. And then he said, when he left, he came out of the Court of Appeal, he told the reporters that the whole world is waiting on the leader of the opposition. Those were his words. And this is our Attorney General, the people we have trust, that we're supposed to have trust and confidence in. This is them, abusing their office. Now, another point, the judges made the point that in 2015, after
Yeah.
the president at the time dissolved parliament, elections were held within 90 days. So that 90
Yeah.
days is a normal time for elections
Yeah.
to be held.
Yes.
And so this is not completely outside of the realm of what's normal.
It's more than normal because the Constitution makes it very clear that the president, one, can call elections at any time in the 5 years at his own whim and fancy. He doesn't need to have a no confidence to do that. Secondly, that the Constitution makes it clear that from the time when the president names a date, elections must be held within 3 months. So the 3 months that has been spoken about, that the government tries to make it look as if it's only for no confidence motion.
Right.
It is actually in the constitutional reform process that it was very clear. The GCOM must be ready at all times to hold elections and to hold elections within 3 months. And that I just thought I'd walk with this, Suzanne, that in 1997, from the date of the dissolution of Parliament to the election was 47 days. 47
Right,
days.
47,
In 2001, from the date of dissolution to the election was 32 days. 2006, there was a slight problem, and it took 113 days, and this was with parliamentary approval, and that was a no confidence issue. The 2011, it took 62 days, and in 2015, it took 72 days. So when we go back to 1997, at no point other than 2006 did elections take 90 days.
Right.
And in fact, as I said, the 113 days of 2006 was actually approved by Parliament.
Was approved by
the extension.
by 2/3
By
majority.
an amendment to the Electoral Laws Act to allow for the additional months, and it wasn't the government requesting that, it was actually GCOM had a difficulty. And so, but the date of the dissolution of elections, so the president had dissolved and then the president, so it wasn't that they were doing it prior to. And in fact, the point that Mr. Mendez was pointing out on that clip too, there is no provision in the Constitution or law for GCOM to postpone or to say they're not ready.
Right.
They only, when the president names a date and they have to be serious hardship or danger, can GCOM say we need to postpone an election. Nor can they do it by themselves. They and it's either specific to a given area or across the country or several areas. But they have to go to the Prime Minister and say what the problem is. And the Prime Minister has to invite the leader of the opposition, and they have to agree that this is of such great, danger that the election should be postponed either for that area, and the date has to be specified. It cannot be open-ended. So the Constitution is very clear. There's no provision for GCOM to play this role it's playing now. There is 3 months. It should be ready for 3 months. And as you correctly pointed out, December 27th, what the PRO had said was absolutely true. They were ready to do it within the time frame. The GCOM has become, under this government, a creature of the president. Basically, it's the creature of the president. And so I think the GCOM staff are now getting very worried because it's tainting their professionalism,
Correct.
And
the CCJ seems, they really want our leaders to get together and to, as they said yesterday, they're not involved in politics.
Yeah.
And they really want to give our politicians a chance to come to this decision in the interest of all Guyanese. And the leader of the opposition has always been willing to meet the president at the time convenient for him. We also saw a statement from the WPA and the AFC calling for respect and acceptance of the decision from the CCJ, but there's a but that this list of electors be a credible one. This is a new word in our elections.
They're following
elections.
pattern with the PNC. So the PNC calls the shots. It's the largest party in the APNO. WPA is a minute party, and the AFC is part of the whole thing. So Mr. Granger, by talking about clean and credible list, which is what he said in March 2019, prior to the deadline of the 21st, he started to use the word credible and clean list, and that the list was corrupted and inflated. He never talked about 200,000 incorrect entries. The first time I think Guyana heard that number was on the Tuesday, the same day of the,
On the
CCJ
18th.
18th of the CCJ ruling.
He called the list outdated and corrupted.
Yes, and he talked about 200,000 incorrect entries.
Entries.
No one has ever said that. Not the GCOM, not the government commissioners in the GCOM, not the PNC. No one has ever said that. So where he pulled that out from a hat, God knows. But he had signaled from March 2019 that this is the way they wanted to go. And I think basically the issue of this whole issue of a list has become the means to defer elections to next year and maybe beyond. Let me just read one thing for you. GCOM approached the United Nations to assist them with their ICT specialist, which is what manages the database and the compilation of the list, etc. And this was actually an agreement between the government and the opposition in GCOM. And they were written to. The UN sent an electoral assessment mission to Guyana in May last year. They met all the stakeholders, every Tom, Dick, and Harry you can think about in civil society, political parties,
Right.
religious bodies. And they made their recommendations to GCOM in May. And this is what I wanted to read for our readers. It says, and I'm quoting from it, an important aspect of the electoral process is the preparation of the voters list. Many stakeholders perceive the voters list to be considerably inflated. Please remember, this is May. Some interlocutors, including senior government officials, mention the need to start afresh by creating a new voters list for the 2020 elections by conducting a house-to-house voter registration. Critics to new voter registration have proffered that the existing list can be cleansed through various means. It is the view of the Needs Assessment Mission that there is no certainty that a new voters list will have more credibility than the current list, and that stakeholders will trust it more. Furthermore, any list created close to the elections will likely be criticized as politically motivated. So this is May last year. When they sent this document, I understand they asked to meet with the chairman, Mr. Patterson, to discuss their findings. And that is when the chairman refused to meet with them, and the government refused to meet with them. And from hence, they have not been able to discuss and present their findings.
Right.
So here is a UN body that came in to assess, do we need a new voters list? Don't we need a vote? And here in May 2018, they say, no, you don't need it. That there are enough mechanisms, continuous registration, claims and objection, that you can clean up the list. Now remember, this mission 2 came before the conclusion of the last continuous registration, which is July
Right.
last year. So I mean, the issue, the list is merely another means. The government's been running on a track to find every means possible to not have elections. They chose the legal route. When it came out March 22nd in their favor, they were happy. Then they found that we went to the court, and now they're declared illegal as of March 21st. They then have gone to the GCOM, controlling the GCOM, politically managing the GCOM, so there's no preparation for 83 days now.
Right.
GCOM has done nothing for 183 days to prepare for elections. And then you have now, having lost the legal battle, GCOM still holding on and doing as they're told, and you have now this whole issue of the list. And this is where AFC and WPA, particularly WPA, whose leader, Walter Rodney, lost his life and was assassinated by according to the Commission of Inquiry, that Burnham was involved and the government was involved. Here is this party totally sucking up to the government, following the orders and saying, we need a credible list. I guess they believe that whatever Mr. Granger says about 200,000 names are incorrect entries. You know, where did he pull this out from a hat?
No, you said what was GCOM doing since the 21st of December last year.
Right.
Now, mind you, those recommendations from the United Nations was even before the
Yes,
no confidence
May
motion.
2018,
right.
May.
And on all of this controversy, it was
Yes,
before that.
Exactly.
And if you can recall, on Labor Day of this year, we had Lincoln Lewis get up and give a speech talking about how the GCOM commissioners on the PPP side should not get paid because they're not attending meetings.
Exactly.
Now, what was GCOM doing since the 21st of December last year
Right.
to now? We're in June, and they still are saying that they are not ready to deliver elections. Their constitutional mandate, they are not ready to fulfill. What have they been doing? They're the ones that should not have been getting paid.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's a level, one can look at it on the simplistic ways, incompetence, mismanagement, but worse than that, this is where the as a constitutional body, GCOM is supposed to be insulated from the political influence. And that the commissioners who sit there, even though they're appointed by different government and opposition, are there to uphold the Constitution and the law. And what you have in this situation is a chairman who was a former justice voting with the government people to not implement or stand and defend the Constitution. It says that a no confidence motion was passed.
Right.
You know, and so the government is going to do everything possible, and we have to make sure that we hold them on a tight rein. There is no way, I think, that the CCJ can deviate from the 3 months, although they may in the end be reluctant to enforce it. However, they have ruled no confidence motion is valid, 33 is valid, Charandas vote is valid, and that elections, therefore, the government is therefore illegal. They should stand resigned, as the High Court judge had said since January the 31st, and that elections must be held within 3 months. And so whether we start the 3 months counting from the time when the July 12th, which means we're having elections in October, but it cannot be where GCOM, and as the court, one of the judges said, that you can't ransom. GCOM can't be the means to ransom the Guyanese people from exercising their democratic right to vote.
Right.
And so if there can be a new chairman, it nevertheless means that GCOM has to recognize, and I ask GCOM staff, put aside the commission, the GCOM staff, the chief elections officer, the deputy, etc., are all guided by the Constitution, and that they must be defenders of the Constitution. They're expected to be professionals. And at this point, the lack of confidence people in our country have for GCOM machinery is not just about what Mr. Patterson has done and what the commissioners have done. It's to do with actually the machinery. Because we've seen in the States, Trump has done many things that are controversial, but the democratic institutions in the United States are entrenched. So even if you do have a president who wants to undermine or tinker with the Constitution, the institution resists that because that's what mature democracies are about. In Guyana, as we're still a relatively new democratic nation, what you have is that the democratic institutions in this country are being undermined by APNU. And it requires people who will stand in defense of the Constitution, defense of the rule of law. Because despite what the courts do on July the 12th, if this government moves in the direction of no elections and somehow we're ending up next year, as a democratic country that is still recognized as a democratic country, we will no longer be in the democratic fold. We will be a pariah state, which is what I said in another program. We will be a pariah state. When one looks at Venezuela, the Venezuelan President Maduro was elected by his people. Whether the opposition boycotted at the time, he's elected by his people. We have a situation where a no confidence vote of 33 against 32 is saying the parliament, the legislature, has lost confidence. And therefore, the point made by the judge is that international practice, he was careful to say international practice, not law, is that when there's a no confidence motion, the government becomes a caretaker government. It stands resigned. It's a caretaker government, and only raison d'etre is to hold elections.
Right.
And so the use now of this credible elections and house to house, and I want to talk about more the house to house issue, because I think people are still not clear. What
Yes,
is the
I'm-
house to house? What is the continuous, and what's the claims and objection?
I was going to ask you again to explain to our viewers for the millionth time, because I've done it many times on this program. I had Joe Hamilton with me here last week, and he explained again. It's a concern of mine, especially because when I go on Facebook and we see these posts
Right.
about GCOM and so on, I see in the comments people are still asking, if young people are not on the list, how do they get on the list? Or if I'm not registered, how do I do it?
Okay,
And
yeah.
these are people who are asking genuine questions.
Yes.
So once again, tell our viewers.
Let's see if I can
what's
get
the,
it right.
What's the process? What's the procedure known as the continuous registration, and why house-to-house registration is not necessary?
Okay. After the violence of 97 and the constitutional reform, the issue was that we go to local government after that. And the government, the opposition at the time, headed by then Mr. Corbyn, was opposed and wanted a new list after the 2001 election. And so, 2006, sorry. So that for peace, and the interlocutors of the day was that we should have the mother of all house-to-house, mother of all registrations. And that was, it was called the mother of all registrations because the agreement, a signed agreement between Mr. Corbyn and Mr. Jagdeo, in the presence of the diplomatic corps, in the presence of the commissioners of GCOM, and the chairman at the time, Mr. Surge Bally, Dr. Surge Bally, was that this was the mother of all registration. This was to go house to house registering everyone who was 14 years and up with fingerprints, the biometrics, and the photograph. And it had to be done with a birth certificate and or passport. That then, part of that agreement was to amend the laws so that you would have continuous registration twice a year, every 6 months, that people 14 years and up could voluntarily go to any GCOM center in their area, get registered, get their ID card, and they would be put on what is called the national registration list. So that's done. So the laws were amended accordingly. The house-to-house registration took place. It took between 9 and 10 months to finish the house-to-house registration, because some of you do not think, please do not think that everyone lives like in Georgetown, next to each other. So even doing Georgetown was difficult with 100,000 people. So when you get into the interior, where you might have to go up a river for 90 miles to find 10 people who need to be registered. But that's their right. They must be registered. So that was done, and so from 2008 the laws were amended, and we have had continuous registration from then every 6 months, which means people come forward, people who've died, and you have the death certificate, the names come off. In 2015, there was a continuous registration and claims and objection period before the elections of May 2015. Mr. Granger and his party had no problem with the list, although we felt maybe it had problems, and when we went to the elections, we went for an election petition afterwards, which wasn't to do with the list, it was to do with what had happened in the polling station. Mr. Lowenfield said at that time that the list was credible. He said that in court. In fact, he has been the main person blocking our election petition since 2015 to now. Our election petition has not been heard. In 2015, so continuous registration continued 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. At no point does the government have a problem. Then we have the no confidence, and suddenly this becomes an issue. We feel very strongly that with a claims objection, this can be handled. Now, what's the difference between a continuous registration and claims objection? Continuous registration is normally for 3 months, a 3-month period every 6 months. And that it is for persons of 14 years and up. So this is what's called civic registration, 14 years and up. It is also a period where if people have died, you can bring in the death certificate of your family and have them removed from the list. Claims and objection is a voter's issue, not a 14-year-old. So GCOM, once the president says, I am proclaiming so-and-so date for the elections, then the GCOM creates an eligibility date. You're 18 as of such date. So you may not be 18 now, but you can go on the claims objection because on the date the president's announced, you will be 18. So that's what it means. So the claims objection has nothing to do with 14-year-olds now. This is those who are and will be 18 as of the qualifying date for when elections are. And it can be 2 weeks claims, 1 week objection, or as long as 6 weeks, depending on the time frame for the elections. It allows for, in both cases, continuous and claims, that if you go and make a claim, the GCOM has to take the scrutineers from the parties and come and knock at your door and say, you know, to make sure the photograph looks like you, that this is where you're living, etc. That's called verification. The other aspect that's important for the voters and for trust in the machinery was the inclusion in the electoral laws to allow for verification of the fingerprints. And whether GCOM is doing that now or not is uncertain. I can't answer that. But that the fingerprints of all of us who've been put in the system are supposed to be very cross-matched against each other so that you can pick up duplicates, because nobody's fingerprints are the same. You know, you could have the same name, you could have people creating different names, but when you cross-match in the database, the fingerprints, you pick up the duplicates, even though they may have different names and live in different parts of the country. So whether GCOM is doing that is an important factor in building trust and confidence, and it would pick up duplicates or stuff like that. So claims objections is a way, and before the 2016 election, we not only had continuous, but we had claims objection. Before the 28 local government elections, November, we had a continuous registration and a claims objection. So that the list is constantly being updated and corrected. The issue of how do you remove a name from a list, our laws do not allow us that for me to walk into a GCOM center and say, my neighbor dead, take you off the list. The law will not allow that. The only way you can take a name off the list, say a person who's died, is that the family has to bring in the death certificate, or the GRO, the Guyana Registration Office, has to present to a GCOM on a regular basis the number of death certificates they've issued, so the names can be taken off. People can transfer from one location to another based on working and whether it would be convenient on election day for them to vote in Essequibo when they're now living in Georgetown. All those things can be done in a claims and objection period. It's simple and easily done. You don't necessarily need a voter ID, a national ID card to vote. You can vote with your passport. And in fact, because of the station on election day, our folios are there, what's called a folio. So Suzanne has, when at her station, they'll have her name on the list, and they'll have a folio with her photograph and her address and everything and her ID number. So when she presents herself, they will look at the photograph, does it look like her or not look like her? And therefore they then allow her to proceed. So even if you don't have an ID card and you present yourself to the station, when the photograph looks like you and that you're allowed to vote, you might have to have a passport or some other form of identification to support it. So it's important that people know that the claims objection can be easily done. Let me give you an example of some things. I was on a program on Sunday in New York, and Mr. Schumann was on it. He was the Tusha of St. Cuthbert's. And he made it clear to the panel that on the issue of house to house, that his community, St. Cuthbert's, which has, let's say, about 2,000 people, not all of which are voters or eligible to vote, that GCOM had come during the continuous registration and registered everyone that was 14 years and up. Those 14-year-olds, he says, some of them who were registered in 2015 may be able to vote in 2020. Those who vote in 2016 may not. Those in 2017 will not be. And those in 2018 will not be. So it's a constant thing that this whole talk about 14-year-olds, why on the picketing that they had the other day, why were there no 18-year-olds there? Why was it a bunch of people who are in the, what you call senior citizen group? Why were there no 18-year-olds there to say, my name is not on the list? And in fact, a number of people who, with their placards said they weren't not on the list, were actually on the list. And we were able to verify that. This is a sham, this is a hoax. And they're trying to also even pull the wool in their presentations, that is, before the court, the CCJ, to say that the credible list can only come through a house to house. The fact that they're telling the court and the public that we can do this in 4 months' time means that we now have a concern of whether this is real. Because we know in the last house to house, it took 9 to 10 months to finish the list, doing the houses. By Marcus, Mr. Marcus, saying that the earliest date the list will be available, will be ready December 25th. Why December 25th? Goodness knows. Is that you will need now, after that, a minimum of 50 to 60 days more before you hold elections. So he's not saying elections will be held December 25th, he's saying the list. And so we don't have confidence in this process. We believe once we go down this road, our house to house, there's going to be slippage. It's going to be December, then it's going to be January, then it's going to be February, etc. And that the scheduled elections for Guyana, under the from 2015, is not due until June 10th to September 9th. That's when we're due for elections. That doesn't mean the president can't call elections, as I said before that. But this view that Mr. Marcus said to the court that this would be near elections when they're due, March 2020, is not true. And so we're going to be slipping. There is too much slippage, as one of the judges recognized in the court on Monday. There's too much opportunity for slippage. And we have to recognize what the lawyer is saying is that December 21st was the no conference. You're telling me that a year afterwards plus the Constitution has not been adhered to of 3 months. So the government is being, I think, reckless, adventurous, and they are going to undermine totally the democratic foundation of this country. And the onus is on them. They can't keep talking, well, let's go talk, let's go talk. The one issue, both the AFC statement tonight and the WPA statement and the PNC and Mr. Granger, is that we want time for the list.
Right.
They're not willing to abide by the 3 months. And we're convinced the 3 months can be done and done well. And it's possible. And the fact that I showed before, other elections have been held less than 90 days with a GCOM that had their list in order, had their machinery in order, and was complying with the Constitution, which says they must be ready at any time.
Right. So we're going to, it's 10:16 already, we're going to go to the phone lines and we're going to take a few calls.
Okay.
But before we do so, I hope that the viewers understand now that even if a date is to be declared within 90 days, we will still go to a claims and objection period. And if you're 20, 30, 40, however old you are, you're going to be able to walk into a GCOM office during a certain period of time and get your name on the list. You will not be disenfranchised. You will be able to vote on election day.
Susan, there's one thing, let me just clarify one thing before we move from that. The claims and objection, the present registration list, our names are on it. Most of our names are on it. Those who are not, as Susan said, you go make a claims and objection, you can get on the list once they set up the period for claims and objection.
Right.
If you go to house, the national database of registrants is created, goes back to 0. And that's where some people feel, well, I'm on the list. I was on the list, I voted in November 2018. When you go to house, the list collapses. It dissolves. Basically, you're down to 0. And so all of us who are on the list now have to be in a sense, re-registered, fingerprinted again, photographed again. And one of the issues that has been raised is whether we have to get new ID cards. which is a whole new process, another delay. Because in 2008, when we did the house to house, all the red ID cards, the old red ID cards were dismissed. There was a one in between that was dismissed, and so we had brand new ID cards. That whole process took a year. And so I want the viewers to be very clear that what the government is, the direction the government is going in, is one in which they're buying more time to stay in power regardless of our constitution, regardless of democracy. That they're driven by the desire to remain in power, and that is the bottom line. And they'll do anything to do that, and so we have to be able to speak out, to fight it out, to make sure that they don't succeed.
Right. Okay, let's take a few calls. Caller, you're on the air.
Good night.
Good evening.
I would like to say one thing, that Ranger knows exactly what he's doing. He is a dictator. And what they are trying to do, they are trying to bring foreign citizens like the Haitians, the Cubans, and whatever. So they are trying to buy time to give them citizenship, and they're going to maybe do some fraud business and make them to become citizens of the country. So is the reason they are dictating daytime. Whatever they want to do, and they feel Guyanese people as. And I would like Mr. Jagdev to know something. When the PNC, when the people are ready to protest, they are so vicious, like hyena. And we, the PNC supporters, we have to suffer in the hands of them. They can burn down, they can break down, they can destroy, everything is okay. But now they are talking about, they want to create crime now, which they always do. But they're giving themselves time so that they can put more people on the list and claim they are Guyanese, and they can give them time to vote, and they're going to put them in power and fool them and say, yo, we're going to give you a house, we're going to give you land, you're welcome to Guyana at any time. We like you people, and we're going to deal with you, nice. That's all my contribution.
All right, caller, thank you for coming through. So, like the caller, most Guyanese realize that this is a ploy.
Yeah.
The government is clutching at straws, anything to delay the elections. Caller, good evening.
Good evening, Susan.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I always like your program.
Okay, thank you.
But I don't know why. Y'all need to give the viewers some chance to talk, because all the viewers cannot reach with y'all at one time.
Okay. Well,
So,
you have your chance now. You go ahead.
I'm just Mrs. Shearer is here. Good night, Miss Shearer.
Good night.
Yeah, don't mind that you take 45 minutes of the program. Okay, we are the young people in this country, and we don't need to take fooling anymore from this government. They fool us already, and we have to stand for our right. If we have to take the street and protest to get them out, because presently now the government is illegal. And I am so happy that the GCOM chairman goes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I hope all the other rest go behind of him. And I am happy to welcome Mr. Irfan Ali to rule this country and lead us on the right path. And secondly, I am happy to know that I looked at the news this afternoon and saw what could happen to the finance minister in time to come. Thank you so much.
Okay, caller, thank you for coming through. Would you like to respond?
No, let's take some more callers.
Because the callers are complaining they want to get through.
No, that's okay.
Caller,
That's
good
normal.
evening.
Good night, sir.
Good night.
Here,
Good night.
she was talking on TV, right? If we are talking of the government, not exactly all the rules that they charge.
Yes.
You know that's what they're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Need lawyer feel to remove from Chico. And you can remember before the last election, announced, all the minister office was locked. The government take over office yet, and they locked all the minister office and put it here and put police to guard all the ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And we need the PVP to get a good prime minister candidate. We don't need no army person. We need a politician to be our prime minister for the PP party.
Okay, caller. Thank you.
Right.
Well, I hope that the viewers are paying attention, and just like the callers, they know what's happening. They know that it's a delaying tactic, and that we're not going to stand for this, and we're going to turn out at the polls. Caller, good evening.
Good evening.
Yes,
I am wondering,
Good evening.
I am Nick.
Can you turn down your volume, please, for your television? Hello?
Hello.
Yes, go ahead. You're on the air.
Yes, madam. Good night, Susan.
Good night, sir.
I'm a strong PPP strongholder from Enmore.
Okay.
I am a sugar worker for 25 years. And what we go through in this country is very, very hard. It makes our family in this country. And we are need change immediately. And we are thank God for Jagdeo and Mr. Anandalal. They did a great job in this country. And let me hope and thank God that we have a good election coming up soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay, we look forward to your continued support. Let's have some comments.
Okay, I think the issue that this government only responds to pressure. It feels that it can get away with what it wants to do, it will get away with it. Or it feels it can get away with it. We have been, the PPPC and our leaders, and Mr. Jagdeo and our presidential candidate, we have been extraordinarily patient from December 21st to now.
Somebody called me today and said that they're amazed at Bar Jagdeo's patience and the way he conducts himself at his press conferences.
Yeah, we have been extraordinarily patient. And it's not that we're not being sorely tempted by the government and the behavior, and including on June the 18th, the speeches that were made in Bartica and the social media, and people like Mr. Rickford Burke accusing us of calling for war and saying we have a possession of all these weapons, etc. We have been sorely tempted, and we have restrained ourselves because we believe that we are going through the paces because the world, for many reasons, and maybe sometimes believes the PNC that the PPP is this wicked party. We're not. In fact, in this case, we have been extraordinarily patient in ensuring that the rule of law is what we're fighting for. The issue, the whole concept of responsible government is based on two premises. That the government has the confidence of the electorate, and it has the confidence of the parliament, of the legislature. On November 2018, the government lost the confidence of the electorate of this country when the PPPC won 65% of the 80 local authorities. In 2016, it had lost 2. And that was a few months after the 2015 election, not even a year later. The government moved from what was 33 seats, or what was considered 50-point-something% to suddenly receiving about 30% of the local government elections. After 3 years in government, they go to the election, they lose again and lose worse. They created local authorities deliberately in areas to try to enhance their votes. It bombed out completely. And so it isn't just a no confidence motion. Responsible and responsive government are based on 2 planks. The electorate gives you confidence for you to govern, and the legislator has confidence in you. On November the 12th, 2018, this government lost the confidence of the electorate. Over 90% of the voters on the voters list for the 80 local authorities. That is what I'm saying. So the whole country's electorate, almost 90% of the electorate of the whole list is what voted in, are on the list for the local authorities. And so the government lost. That is what triggered us going to a no confidence motion. So when you hear the president and everybody saying that, that how could one man in parliament bring down a government when there are 200,000 people who are supporting APNU? Well, that may have been in 2015. In November 2018, they certainly didn't get that. And so the 2 planks upon which a government is, their foundation was just decimated November 12th and December 21st. And so we are quite prepared to continue to fight. One, we've gone through the legal process. We have been patient. Our language is not incendiary. It is not the kind of language of calling for war, and the Prime Minister says he's put on his olive green shirt to do battle. A man who was decimated at the AFC Congress as not to be the Prime Minister candidate, so much so he had to walk out of the Congress. And here's a man that less than 24 hours, 48 hours later, he's putting on olive green battle dress. This, and because of the CCJ ruling. We are prepared to continue to be a responsible opposition, because let me tell you, my dear friends, and I listen to the callers, we must never be intimidated. We must never be afraid. We are the government in waiting. You know, you have a lady in waiting at a wedding. We are the government in waiting. Whether the elections are held tomorrow, in 3 months' time, or if the government ramroads themselves through our constitution, the elections, we will be the government, next government of this country. And Mr. Granger knows that, APNU knows that, WPA knows that, AFC knows that, everybody knows that. And so we're quite prepared. We will continue to take principled and responsible positions in the interests of our country and our people. We do not want war, as Mr. Jordan advocated, and war broke. In addition to that, we have to always remind ourselves, always, whether we like the PPP or not, that despite the APNU getting 100% and 102% turnout in some areas of their support in 2015, the difference between the PPP votes and the APNU votes, IFC, was 4,526 voters. That's all. And so in fact, there should have been a recount of the votes. There wasn't. Dr. Suraj Valley denied it. GCOM denied it. But that were those votes to have been recounted, and a lot of the spoiled votes counted, we would not be in this position today. The PPP would have won. But we bided our time. We've been an aggressive, assertive opposition, exposing corruption, standing up for people's rights, representing the interests of our people, whether they voted for us or not. And this government has squandered the last 4 years, 5 years now, of the amount of over $1 trillion. They've spent $1.3 trillion in 4 years. What manifestation we see of this $1.3 trillion? The cost of living has increased, the poverty levels are rising. They lost 30,000 jobs. They have squandered the goodwill of the Guyanese people. They squandered the level of economic and financial stability they inherited. And so my position is that they're holding on by their fingernails, not their hands. They're holding on to power with their fingernails. And that can't last for long, my dear friends. So don't get demoralized. Don't get afraid. Don't get intimidated. You know, elections will be held. And they have to be held within 3 months, or we'll see what happens, what the court does, and what this government does, and what do the international community does. Because the issue of Guyana remaining a democratic nation is of fundamental importance for the region and for the international community. And so we have an interesting experience and unique experience coming up. But I hope that Mr. Granger and his government think wisely. Because if they go in the direction that some of us are thinking, to violate the Constitution and have elections sometime next year, that will be the end of the PNC as a serious party in this country. Because APNU supporters who believed in the promises, AFC supporters who believed in the promises, have reached a point where even if they don't like the PPP, they are not prepared to have this country go in an authoritarian direction. They're not prepared to Guyana become a police state. They're not prepared for the Constitution to be eroded. And that is where the issue of Guyana being, and us as a people, defending the Constitution, protecting the Constitution of our country. And so we mustn't be afraid. Things are going to change, and the government in waiting will be the government. and the PPC will win. Don't worry.
All right, Madam Teixeira, I'm going to have to take those comments as your last comments
Yes.
because my operator has indicated to me that we are out of time.
Yeah, 2 minutes over.
And we couldn't have had better closing comments. You know, we are your government in waiting. You have seen what we have done in the past. We have a track record that you can look at, you can compare to what the APNU AFC has done over the last 4 years, more than 4 years now. And as my guest said, you know, we will keep the pressure on. And you have seen today what pressure can do, because you saw that the GCOM chairman has now demitted office. So this is what pressure can do. We can bring about change, and we will continue to keep the pressure on this government. And so we ask for your patience as well. Stay with us and, you know, help us to continue to fight for democracy in this country. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for being here. I hope you
Thank
come
you.
back. And I will see you again next week.
Thank you very much. Good
Good
night.
night.